outset of this hearing in not congratulating you on being chairman of this committee. I had the pleasure of being chairman of this committee, subcommittee, for the past couple of Congresses, and it is a terrific committee with I think, the best jurisdiction in the entire Senate. So I look forward to serving with you as ranking member on the committee.
Thank you.
Mr. Koppel, last time you and I spoke, I asked you what the minimum protections that an extreme risk law should have to ensure that it comports with due process. You responded that laws should not allow ex parte proceedings except on a finding of necessity, that laws should use a clear and convincing standard throughout, and that respondents should have a right to counsel and the right to cross-examination. Do any of the laws currently on the books meet all of these criteria?
There's no one state that has all of them. In several states, you can pick things from several states that are good on a particular item, but no state law has the full scope of what I would say is fair for due process. And as Senator Blumenthal and Mr. Horowitz discussed, there haven't been very many constitutional challenges on this, but the ones that have been not very successful, have failed, and partly because they were very broad kind of facial attacks. The bigger picture is courts aren't always our leaders in protecting due process. Civil asset forfeiture, I think, is now something that people say went way too far, and it has been reformed by statute. But judicially, there was very little that ever got done about that, and most of the challenges failed. So there's the kind of most minimal level of due process that courts will enforce, and then there can be higher, better standards that legislatures insist on.
So President Biden instructed the Department of Justice to develop a model red flag law for the states. Last time you were here, we discussed the fact that Giffords, a progressive gun control organization, blocked the drafting of a model red flag law by the Uniform Law Commission because they insisted on their own more extreme model. I'm concerned that the Department of Justice will put out a model law that is more or less the same as Giffords' extreme model. Can you tell us, in your judgment, what that model looks like and why it's so extreme?
It's a model that on the one hand doesn't view the temporary, whether for 2 weeks or even a mistaken thing for much longer, deprivation of the right to arms as a significant harm. So its premise is somewhat unbalanced in how it weighs things. And it's ultimately something that's based on one side of the issue, which is understandable. That's the faction that won the election and controls the presidency. But what was going on in the Uniform Law Commission was to take into account both points of view. So, for example, one group in the commission was the International Association of Chiefs of Police, which is has been for decades, a very pro-gun control organization. And on the other hand was the National Sheriff's Association, which is definitely not absolutist against gun control, but is more typically skeptical. And so if you had both of those perspectives, and I think that would lead to a more balanced, fair, and accurate process. Because I think there's agreement that there's some people from whom guns should be taken away for public safety. And also there has to be recognition that sometimes mistakes happen and people are improperly deprived. And we want to get a process that has the highest possible feasible level of accuracy.
So President Biden has nominated David Chipman, who's a senior policy advisor for Giffords, to be the director of the ATF. I understand that you have a bit of history with Mr. Chipman regarding red flag laws, and that he seemed not to have great concern about law-abiding citizens having their right to self-defense stripped away. Could you give us some background on what happened with Mr. Chipman?
Sure. He was on the commission, a member of the Uniform Law Commissioners study committee with me. And I brought up, as you mentioned, I brought up the problem of we want to make sure we don't disarm innocent people, even on a temporary basis, because that creates danger for them. And then his response was, well, people can just buy a replica gun, and maybe if they're a great actor, they can scare people away with a replica gun, but that's not really an effective alternative to an actual firearm for lawful self-defense. And another part in the discussion, I said, I brought up the point about no-knocks. And in general, of course, no-knocks are necessary in some situations, but we want to have them used when they are necessary and not just routinely. And we've seen lots of situations outside of red flags where no-knocks just get carried out kind of in a reckless way because the local SWAT team doesn't have anything else to do that day. Mr. Chipman's response was, don't tell the police how to do their job. Well, I guess as a constitutional law professor, and my dad was in the state legislature as a Democratic liberal representative from Northeast Denver for 22 years, we tell police how to do their jobs all the time. That's what the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution does. The Fifth Amendment does that. And so do all kinds of statutes we have in this country.
Thank you, Mr. Koppel. And a final question, Ms. Gosier. Thank you for appearing today. Thank you for telling the story of the horrific murder of your husband. And thank you for using the pain and horror of that crime, using it to try to protect others who might be victims of violent crime in the future. Your husband was murdered in a gun-free zone, and you followed the law. You did not have your firearm. You were not able to protect yourself or protect him. That is a familiar pattern with gun control efforts, and many of the mass murders we've seen have occurred similarly in so-called gun-free zones. Are you concerned that the same will be true with red flag laws, that law-abiding citizens could have their firearms confiscated, particularly when they're vulnerable to criminals, but the criminals will refuse to turn over their weapons, and the result will be other potential victims of crime being left vulnerable to violence?
Yes, absolutely. I'm very concerned about that. Of course, there are people who can abuse red flag laws. There are people that can abuse existing laws too, but at least with the Baker Act, different states call it different things, but we pretty much have an option that is the Baker Act. They call it different things in different states, but it exists all over the nation. Every state has a similar law to the Baker Act, and they offer protections. I don't have $10,000 in my savings account to cover legal fees if someone flags me for some reason. It's pretty scary that someone could knock on your door, or law enforcement knock on your door at 5 a.m. and say, hey, we're taking your guns, and you have no idea why. You don't know why. What's going on? I need to be able to protect myself. I just think due process is so important, and mental health experts should always be involved. That should be mandatory. If we're talking about mental health experts should absolutely be involved in that due process. I believe due process needs to come first. Look, if someone is truly dangerous, if they're truly dangerous, they need to be confined to a mental health facility. So you take someone's gun away. They're still dangerous. That's how I feel.
Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Cruz. Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal, for this hearing and for your long time passion and leadership for protecting our people from the scourge of gun violence. Mr. Horowitz, we passed a red flag law in Rhode Island. It went into effect in June of 2018, and the last report I have ends